A toddler separated from their family is found by a lioness. What unfolds in the wilderness is beyond anyone's imagination. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of the Colorado forest, casting dappled shadows on the hiking trail where the Matthews family walked together. 10-year-old Ethan lagged slightly behind his parents and older sister, his attention constantly drawn to the various wonders of nature surrounding them. The family had chosen this particular trail in Roosevelt National Forest for their weekend hike, known for its diverse wildlife and spectacular views. Ethan carried his brand-new digital camera, a birthday present he'd received just last week. He'd already captured photos of various birds, interesting rock formations, and even a small deer that had crossed their path earlier. His father, David, kept glancing back to ensure Ethan wasn't falling too far behind, while his mother, Sarah, consulted the trail map, pointing out landmarks to his sister Emma. The forest buzzed with life around them. Birds chirped overhead, squirrels darted between trees, and insects hummed in the underbrush. As they rounded a bend in the trail, something extraordinary caught Ethan's eye. A massive swallowtail butterfly, its wings a brilliant combination of yellow and black, unlike anything he'd seen before. The butterfly fluttered just off the main trail, landing briefly on a wild violet before taking flight again. Without thinking twice, Ethan stepped off the marked path, raising his camera to capture the perfect shot. The butterfly seemed to dance just out of range, leading him further into the forest. Just a little closer, he whispered to himself, careful not to startle the creature. He took one step, then another, following the butterfly's erratic flight pattern deeper into the woods. The butterfly finally settled on a branch at the perfect height for a photograph. Ethan steadied his camera, adjusted the focus, and pressed the shutter button. The resulting click seemed unusually loud in the quiet forest, and the butterfly took flight once again, disappearing into the canopy above. It was only then that Ethan looked around and realized his mistake. The well-maintained trail had disappeared, replaced by dense undergrowth and unfamiliar trees. The forest looked different here, darker, more primitive. The familiar sounds of his family's voices had vanished, replaced by the eerie whisper of wind through the branches. Panic began to rise in his chest as he spun around, trying to retrace his steps. But every direction looked the same. An endless sea of trees and shadows. He called out, "Mom? Dad?" His voice sounded small and frightened in the vast forest. No response came except for the mocking echo of his own voice. Ethan's heart began to race as the reality of his situation sank in. The forest that had seemed so welcoming just moments ago now felt overwhelming and alien. He remembered the safety instructions from the trailhead. Stay in one place if you get lost. But fear was already taking hold, pushing rational thought aside. He picked a direction that he thought might lead back to the trail and started walking, calling out periodically for his parents. The forest grew denser, and the light dimmed as clouds gathered overhead. Time seemed to lose meaning as he wandered, each tree looking like the last, each call for help swallowed by the vastness of the wilderness. Then, cutting through the relative quiet of the forest, came a sound that made Ethan's blood run cold. A deep, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath his feet. He froze mid-step, his breath catching in his throat. Another growl, closer this time, sent him scrambling behind the nearest tree, a massive pine with thick, rough bark. Pressing his back against the tree trunk, Ethan tried to make himself as small as possible. His hands trembled as he clutched his camera to his chest, no longer interested in capturing the wildlife around him. The sound had seemed to come from somewhere to his left, but in the dense forest, sounds could be deceiving. He closed his eyes tightly, willing himself to be invisible, as the forest around him grew unnaturally quiet. The silence was almost worse than the growl. At least the growl had given him a direction to avoid. Now, the absence of even bird songs told him that something large and dangerous was nearby. The only sounds were his own ragged breathing and the rapid beating of his heart. which seemed loud enough to give away his position to whatever lurked in the gathering shadows. Through the thick foliage, Lila moved with practiced stealth, her muscular body low to the ground. The lioness had been tracking unusual movement in her territory when she first caught the unfamiliar scent. Human, young, and radiating fear. She'd seen humans before, usually in their noisy vehicles or walking in groups on designated paths, but never one so small and alone. From her elevated position on a rocky outcrop, Lila observed the boy. Her keen eyes noted his trembling form behind the pine tree, his small hands clutching something against his chest. The scent of his fear drifted up to her on the afternoon breeze, mixed with salt, tears, she realized. Though she typically avoided human contact, something about this situation stirred her deeply. Lila had lost her pride months ago when human development had fragmented their territory. Since then, she carved out a solitary existence in this remote part of the forest, far from the usual human activities. The boy's presence was an anomaly, one that triggered not her hunting instincts, but something else, a protective urge she couldn't ignore. Moving with deliberate slowness, Lila began her descent from the outcrop. Each placement of her large paws was carefully calculated to minimize noise. Her tail, usually held high for balance, remained low and still. She understood that her appearance could trigger panic in the small human, and despite her intentions, she was still a predator approaching potential prey. The boy remained frozen behind his tree, unaware of her careful approach. Lila could hear his rapid heartbeat, smell the fresh surge of fear as a twig snapped under her paw. She paused, allowing her presence to be sensed gradually rather than suddenly. Her own heart beat steadily, calm and controlled, as she evaluated the situation. A shaft of late afternoon sunlight broke through the canopy, illuminating her tawny coat as she emerged from the shadows. The movement caught the boy's attention, and she heard his sharp intake of breath. Their eyes met across the clearing, his wide with terror, hers steady and assessing. Lila kept her posture relaxed, her movements slow and non-threatening. In that moment of first contact, time seemed to stop. The forest held its breath as predator and prey sized each other up. But Lila's approach continued to be gentle, almost maternal. She remembered her own cubs from seasons past, how they would tremble with fear during their first thunderstorm, how she would comfort them with her presence. The boy pressed himself harder against the tree trunk as she drew closer, but something in his expression began to shift. Perhaps it was the way she moved or the lack of aggression in her stance, but his terror began to give way to a cautious wonder. His breathing, while still rapid, no longer came in panic gasps. Lila stopped about 10 feet from the tree, settling into a seated position that made her appear less threatening. Her tail curled around her paws, and her ears remained forward, showing interest rather than aggression. She understood that this moment was crucial. One wrong move could send the boy running in panic, potentially putting him in even greater danger in the unfamiliar forest. The distance between them hummed with tension, but also with possibility. For the first time since their encounter began, the boy's scent began to change. The sharp edge of fear began to dull, replaced by something closer to curiosity. Lila remained perfectly still, allowing him to adjust to her presence, letting him make the next move in this delicate dance of trust. This was not a normal encounter for either of them. A lost human child and a solitary lioness in a forest where she shouldn't exist. Yet here they were, defying natural laws and instincts, sharing a moment of connection that would alter both their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The forest around them settled into an expectant silence, bearing witness to this extraordinary meeting. As the setting sun painted the forest in deepening shades of gold, Lila and the boy continued their careful observation of each other. Neither moved, neither broke the fragile peace that had descended over the clearing. It was a moment balanced on a knife's edge, between fear and trust, between wild and tame, between what should be and what was. As darkness began to settle over the forest, the temperature dropped noticeably. Ethan shivered, still positioned behind his tree, but his fear had transformed into a mix of awe and uncertainty. The lioness, he'd begun thinking of her as more than just a wild animal, remained in her watchful position, her presence somehow both powerful and gentle. The first stars appeared through gaps in the forest canopy, and a cool breeze rustled through the trees. Ethan's thin jacket offered little protection against the growing chill. His teeth started to chatter, and he wrapped his arms tightly around himself, trying to preserve warmth. The camera hung forgotten around his neck. Lila observed these changes with growing concern. Her keen senses detected the boy's discomfort, and her protective instincts, already awakened, grew stronger. With fluid grace, she rose from her seated position and closed the distance between them. Ethan tensed momentarily, but didn't retreat as she approached. To his amazement, Lila simply laid down beside him, her large body creating a barrier against the wind. Heat radiated from her fur, and Ethan found himself instinctively leaning toward its warmth. The lioness remained still, allowing this cautious contact. Her presence created a pocket of safety in the darkening forest. As the night deepened, Ethan's exhaustion began to override his remaining apprehension. He slid down to sit on the forest floor, his back still against the tree, but now with Lila's warm bulk pressed against his side. The forest's nocturnal sounds, hooting owls, rustling leaves, and distant animal calls, created an eerily beautiful symphony. "My mom must be so worried," Ethan spoke softly, breaking the long silence. His voice cracked slightly as he thought of his family. "We were supposed to be back before dark. Dad always says to stay on the trail, but that butterfly was so beautiful." He trailed off, remembering the moment that had led to his current situation. Lila's ear twitched at the sound of his voice, and she turned her head slightly to look at him. Her golden eyes reflected what little light remained, appearing to glow in the darkness. Encouraged by her attention, Ethan continued talking, finding comfort in sharing his thoughts with this unlikely companion. "I want to be a wildlife photographer when I grow up," he confided, fingers brushing against his camera. "That's why I followed the butterfly. I've never seen one so big before." He paused, then added, "I've never seen a lioness before either. I didn't even know there were lions in Colorado." As he spoke, Ethan's body gradually relaxed. The warmth from Lila's body and the steady rhythm of her breathing created a cocoon of comfort that helped keep his fears at bay. The forest no longer seemed as threatening with her beside him. Any predator that might have considered aching was kept at bay by Lila's presence. The night wore on, and Ethan found himself sharing more stories. About his sister Emma, who always teased him but also stood up for him at school. About his dreams of traveling the world, taking pictures of wild animals. About his fear of thunderstorms and how his mom would always make hot chocolate when it rained. Lila listened to each word, her tail occasionally twitching, her eyes alert for any danger while the young human beside her talked himself into exhaustion. When Ethan's voice began to drift and his eyes started to close, she shifted slightly, allowing him to lean more comfortably against her side. As sleep finally claimed him, Ethan's last conscious thought was how strange it was that he felt safer next to this wild predator than he had felt all day lost in the forest alone. His hand had somehow found its way into Lila's warm fur, and the steady thrum of her heartbeat served as a lullaby, carrying him into dreams where butterflies led to unexpected friendships rather than fear. Back at the trailhead parking lot, Sarah Matthews paced frantically between the parked vehicles, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke with the park rangers for the third time in an hour. David stood with a group of rangers who were spreading a topographical map across the hood of their patrol vehicle, marking off areas they had already searched. "He was right behind us," Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "We were checking the trail markers, and when I turned around," she couldn't finish the sentence. Emma, Ethan's 14-year-old sister, sat on a nearby bench, clutching her brother's forgotten water bottle, her face pale with worry. Ranger Station Chief Tom Martinez organized his team with practiced efficiency. "We've got about 2 hours of daylight left," he announced, pointing to different sections of the map. "Johnson and Rodriguez take the eastern trails. Peters and Wilson head west. Remember, he's wearing a blue jacket and carrying a black camera." The Rangers quickly gathered their equipment, GPS devices, first aid kits, powerful flashlights, and emergency blankets. They knew time was critical. The Colorado wilderness could be dangerous after dark, with temperatures dropping significantly and various predators becoming more active. Jake Thompson, the newest ranger on the team, studied a fresh set of tracks he discovered just off the main trail. Something about them caught his attention. "Chief," he called out, kneeling beside the prints. "You might want to take a look at these." Martinez joined him, crouching down to examine the tracks in the soft earth. His expression grew serious as he recognized the distinctive pattern. "Mountain lion?" Jake suggested, but Martinez shook his head slowly. "No, these are different. Bigger." Martinez stood up, his face troubled. "These are lion tracks. African lion." He paused, considering the implications. There have been rumors about illegal exotic animal trading in the area, but nothing confirmed until now. The discovery added a new layer of urgency to their search. David overheard their conversation and rushed over, his face ashen. "Lions? Are you saying there are lions out there with my son?" Martinez tried to maintain a calm demeanor while addressing the increasingly panicked father. "Mr. Matthews, we're going to find Ethan. We're calling in additional resources, including a helicopter with thermal imaging capabilities. Every minute counts now." The search teams deployed quickly, their radios crackling with coordinated movements and updates. The sound of their voices calling Ethan echoed through the forest, but as daylight faded, the calls became more urgent. Jake's team took the route following the lion tracks, moving cautiously through the underbrush with tranquilizer guns at the ready. The tracks told a story. The lion had been in the area recently and appeared to be moving in a distinct pattern, unlike the random one, typical of a newly escaped animal. As darkness descended, the rangers switched on their powerful flashlights, creating beams of light that cut through the forest gloom. The helicopter arrived, its searchlight sweeping across the canopy in wide arcs, while its thermal imaging equipment scanned for heat signatures below. Sarah and David were instructed to stay at the command post, though every instinct told them to join the search. Emma remained silent, her eyes fixed on the darkening forest, straining to hear any sound that might indicate her brother's presence. The night grew colder, and the search continued with increasing intensity. Each passing hour brought new challenges and growing concern. The Rangers knew that finding a lost child in the wilderness was always a race against time. But with the confirmed presence of a lion, that race had become even more critical. Through their radios, the teams coordinated their movements, methodically covering ground while staying alert for any sign of either Ethan or the lion. Jake's discovery had changed the entire dynamic of the search operation, adding an element of danger that none of them had anticipated at the start of this day. The morning sun cast long shadows through the trees as Ethan woke to find Lila still beside him, her watchful gaze scanning their surroundings. During the night, he had curled closer to her warmth, and now he found himself using her side as a pillow. Rather than feeling afraid, he felt an unexpected sense of security. Lila rose slowly, stretching her powerful muscles in the morning light. She looked at Ethan and then moved a few steps away, pausing to see if he would follow. Understanding her intention, Ethan got to his feet, brushing off his clothes and adjusting the camera that still hung around his neck. They walked together through the forest, Lila setting a careful pace that Ethan could match. She seemed to have a destination in mind, leading him through paths that avoided thick underbrush and steep inclines. The forest looked different in the daylight, less threatening, more alive with color and movement. After about 20 minutes of walking, they emerged into a stunning clearing filled with wildflowers. Mountain bluebells, Indian paintbrush, and golden columbines created a natural garden that took Ethan's breath away. The morning dew made the flowers sparkle in the sunlight, and butterflies, including one that looked like the one he'd chased, danced among the blooms. Ethan lifted his camera, capturing the scene before him. Lila settled at the edge of the clearing, allowing him to explore while maintaining her protective watch. The boy moved carefully among the flowers, taking pictures from different angles, occasionally glancing back at Lila as if to make sure she was still there. Meanwhile, back at the ranger station, Jake's report about the lion tracks had sparked intense discussion among the search teams. "These tracks are fresh," he insisted, pointing to the clear impressions in the soil. "And they're moving in a pattern that suggests the animal is familiar with the territory." Chief Martinez studied the photographs of the tracks that had been taken. "This isn't just a case of a recently escaped exotic animal," he concluded. "These tracks show an animal that's been living here, adapting to the environment. The real question is, how long has it been here without detection?" The search teams regrouped, now armed with both conventional rescue equipment and tranquilizer guns. The presence of a lion complicated their approach. They needed to find Ethan quickly, but they also had to consider the safety of their teams and the possibility of encountering a large predator. Back in the flower-filled clearing, Ethan had settled into a strange sense of peace. Despite his hunger and lingering worry about his family, the beauty of his surroundings and Lila's constant presence provided comfort. He sat among the flowers, watching his S. He occasionally raised her head to scent the air or scan the tree-line. "You know," he said to Lila, his voice carrying across the quiet clearing, "this would make an amazing story for show and tell. Though I don't think anyone would believe me." He looked through the photos on his camera screen, amazed at how he'd captured the interplay of light and color among the flowers. The rangers, unaware of the peaceful scene unfolding in the clearing, continued their methodical search with growing concern. Jake's discovery of the lion tracks had added a new urgency to their efforts. They knew that with each passing hour, the situation became more critical. As the morning wore on, the sound of helicopter rotors occasionally echoed through the forest, but the dense canopy made aerial observation difficult. The thermal imaging equipment had detected several heat signatures during the night, but distinguishing between various wildlife and their target proved challenging. In the flower-filled clearing, this mechanical intrusion seemed distant and unimportant. Ethan had found a small stream at the edge of the clearing and was taking careful sips of the cool water, following Lila's example. The lioness remained vigilant, her ears constantly moving to track sounds beyond human hearing, her presence a steady comfort in what should have been a terrifying situation. The stream that bordered the clearing beckoned invitingly as the day grew warmer. Lila led Ethan along its banks to a wider section where the water pooled into a natural basin, the surface crystal clear and reflecting the sky above. Small fish darted beneath the surface, their scales catching the sunlight. Despite his situation, Ethan couldn't resist the playful call of the water. He removed his shoes and socks, rolling up his pant legs before dipping his feet into the cool stream. The sensation was refreshing after hours of walking, and he found himself splashing gently, creating patterns in the water's surface. Lila watched from the bank, her tail moving in lazy arcs as she observed the boys play. The water's edge showed signs of regular use. This was clearly one of her favorite spots, perhaps for drinking or cooling off during hot days. Small pebbles lined the bottom of the pool, smoothed by years of flowing water. In his excitement, Ethan moved a bit too quickly on the slick stones. His foot slipped, and he stumbled, scraping his knee against a partially submerged rock. The cut wasn't deep, but it stung, and a few drops of blood welled up from the scratch. "Ow!" he winced, making his way back to the shore. Lila's response was immediate but gentle. She approached him as he sat on the bank, examining his knee. To Ethan's surprise, she lowered her head and carefully licked the small wound. Her rough tongue was warm and surprisingly gentle. Instead of feeling scared, Ethan found himself touched by her concern. "Thanks," he said softly, reaching out to pat her head, an act that would have seemed unthinkable just hours ago. Lila allowed the contact, settling beside him as he dabbed his knee dry with the edge of his t-shirt. The scratch had already stopped bleeding, thanks to her attention. The interaction seemed to strengthen their bond. As they sat by the stream, Ethan found himself talking more freely to Lila, sharing stories about his life back home. He told her about his cat, Mittens, and how different she was from a lioness. He described his school, his friends, and his favorite games. Lila listened with what seemed like genuine interest, her ears moving to track his voice. When he mentioned feeling hungry, she shifted position but didn't leave his side. Instead, She guided him to a nearby berry bush that was safe to eat from, watching as he carefully picked and ate the sweet fruit. The morning passed this way, in a strange but peaceful companionship. Ethan's initial terror had completely transformed into fascination and trust. He found himself studying Lila's behavior, noting how she combined power and gentleness in every movement. His camera captured several remarkable shots of her, drinking from the stream, watching birds overhead, resting in patches of sunlight. Meanwhile, the search party had regrouped to discuss their strategy. Jake's discovery of the lion tracks near water sources led them to focus their search along the stream systems in the area. They theorized that if the lion was an established resident, it would stay near familiar water sources. Chief Martinez coordinated with wildlife experts who had been called in to consult on the situation. The presence of an African lion in the Colorado wilderness was unprecedented, and they needed to handle the situation carefully, both for Ethan's safety and for the lions. Back at the stream, Ethan had found a comfortable spot on a sun-warmed rock, his feet dangling in the water. His knee had stopped hurting, and the berry breakfast had helped with his hunger. Lila remained close, occasionally walking the perimeter of their location as if on patrol, but always returning to his side. The sound of the stream, the warmth of the sun, and Lila's protective presence created an almost dreamlike atmosphere. Despite the circumstances, Ethan felt safe. He had no way of knowing that this peaceful moment was about to be interrupted as the search teams were steadily closing in on their location. High above the forest canopy, the search helicopter made another pass, its specialized equipment scanning the terrain below. The pilot, experienced in search and rescue operations, noticed a heat signature that seemed different from the usual wildlife patterns. Through the dense foliage, their thermal imaging showed two distinct shapes, one small and human-sized, the other larger and distinctly feline. "Base, this is Air Unit 1. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got a possible location, coordinates following." He read off a series of numbers that sent the ground teams into immediate action. The heat signatures were stationary, centered around what appeared to be a small clearing near a stream. From their elevated position, the drone operators deployed their equipment, sending a small reconnaissance drone to get a closer look at the situation. The quiet whir of its rotors was barely noticeable at first, blending with the natural sounds of the forest. As the drone descended below the canopy level, its camera captured an extraordinary scene. The lost boy sat peacefully by a stream, apparently unharmed, while beside him lounged an adult lioness. The images sent back to the base camp caused a mixture of relief and concern among the rescue teams. Chief Martinez studied the live feed with intense focus. "Look at their body language," he noted to Jake, who stood beside him. "The lion isn't showing any aggressive behavior. If anything, it appears to be..." He paused, searching for the right word, "protective." The drone moved closer, its camera zooming in for a better view. The sound finally caught Lila's attention. Her ears swiveled toward the mechanical intrusion, and her muscles tensed slightly. She rose to her feet, positioning herself between Ethan and the approaching drone. Ethan noticed the change in Lila's demeanor and looked up, spotting the drone hovering above them. "It's okay," he said softly to Lila, recognizing the device as a sign that help was nearby. "They're looking for me." But Lila remained vigilant, her eyes fixed on the unfamiliar object. The drone's camera captured this interaction in detail. The boy's calm demeanor, the lioness's protective stance, the apparent bond between them. Back at base camp, the Matthews family watched the feed with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Sarah's hands covered her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks, while David stood in stunned silence. Through the drone's camera, they could see their son was safe, but the situation was far from simple. The presence of the lioness complicated any rescue attempt. Standard procedures for approaching lost children had to be completely reconsidered in light of this unprecedented development. From the command center, Chief Martinez made a crucial decision. "We need to approach with extreme caution," he instructed his teams. "No sudden movements, no loud noises, and absolutely no weapons visible. Tranquilizer guns stay hidden unless absolutely necessary. We don't want to provoke the lion or frighten the boy." The drone maintained its position, providing continuous surveillance as the ground teams carefully coordinated their approach. Through the camera feed, they watched as Lila remained standing, her body language alert but not aggressive, while Ethan appeared remarkably calm despite the drone's presence. The forest seemed to hold its breath as rescue teams moved into position, guided by the drone's coordinates. The peaceful scene by the stream was about to change, and no one could predict how Lila would react to the approach of multiple humans. The next few moments would be critical in determining the outcome of this extraordinary situation. As the drone hovered overhead, Ethan felt a complex mix of emotions wash over him. The familiar sound of approaching voices meant his ordeal was nearly over. He would soon see his family again. Yet looking at Lila, who remained protectively near him, he felt an unexpected sadness. Their brief but profound connection would have to end. "They're coming for me," he said softly to Lila, reaching out to touch her fur one last time. The lioness turned her head to look at him, her golden eyes seeming to understand the significance of the moment. Though she remained alert to the approaching sounds, she didn't move from his side. Through the undergrowth, the first signs of the rescue team became visible. Orange vests flashed between the trees as rangers carefully made their way forward. Chief Martinez led the approach, his movements slow and deliberate. Behind him, Jake kept a tranquilizer gun concealed but ready, hoping it wouldn't be necessary. Ethan could hear his mother's voice among the approaching group, calling his name. The sound made his heart leap, but it also made him acutely aware of the coming separation. He looked at Lila, seeing the tension in her muscles as she assessed the approaching humans. "It's okay," he whispered to her. "Those are my parents. They've been worried about me." His hand rested gently on her shoulder, feeling the rapid beat of her heart beneath her fur. Lila's ears flicked back and forth, tracking the multiple approaching footsteps. The rescue team emerged into the clearing, creating a loose semicircle at a respectful distance. Sarah Matthews let out a choked sob at the sight of her son sitting so close to the lioness, while David held her back from running forward. Emma stood between her parents, her eyes wide with disbelief. Chief Martinez raised his hand, signaling everyone to remain still. The scene before them defied all expectations. A lost child and a lioness, coexisting peacefully beside the stream. Years of training hadn't prepared any of them for this situation. Ethan could feel Lila's muscles tensing further as more people appeared. Her protective instincts were clearly battling with her understanding of the situation. She remained positioned slightly in front of him, but her posture wasn't aggressive, merely cautious. "Mom, Dad," Ethan called out softly, "don't be afraid. This is Lila. She's been protecting me." His voice carried across the clearing, steady and calm. The rangers exchanged glances, amazed at the boy's composure in this extraordinary situation. The tension in the clearing was palpable. Every movement seemed magnified. The rustle of leaves, the sound of the stream, the quiet whir of the drone still hovering overhead. Time seemed to slow as humans and Lioness assessed each other across the short distance. Jake watched through the scope of his tranquil. Eyes are gone, hidden behind his back, but what he saw made him question whether it would be needed. The lioness's body language, while alert, showed no signs of aggression. If anything, she appeared to be waiting for a cue from the boy. Ethan felt torn between two worlds, the familiar comfort of his family and the wild majesty of Lila. He knew he had to go home, but leaving her felt like abandoning a friend. The weight of his camera around his neck reminded him that at least he would have proof of their incredible encounter. The next moments would determine how this unprecedented situation would resolve. The rescue team remained still, letting Ethan take the lead in what had become a delicate dance between the wild and the civilized, between fear and trust, between what was expected and what was possible. The Rangers maintained their positions, their voices lowered to soothing murmurs as they assessed the situation. Chief Martinez took a single step forward, his hands visible and movements deliberately slow. "Ethan," he called softly, "we're going to get you back to your family. Just stay calm and move very slowly." Lila's muscles tensed at Martinez's movement, but Ethan's hand remained steady on her fur. The lioness's tail swished once, her eyes tracking every human in the clearing, but she made no aggressive moves. Her behavior continued to defy their expectations of a wild predator. Sarah and David watched with a mixture of terror and amazement as their son interacted with the lioness. Emma gripped her mother's hand tightly, barely breathing as she watched her little brother prepare to move away from the massive cat. "I have to go now," Ethan whispered to Lila, his voice thick with emotion. He slowly rose to his feet, keeping one hand in contact with her fur. The lioness turned her head to look at him, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent communication. Martinez took another careful step forward, ready to react if the situation changed. However, Lila's attention remained focused on Ethan, her body shifting slightly to maintain her protective position while allowing him space to move. Ethan took his first step toward his family, his hand reluctantly sliding from Lila's fur. The lioness watched him intently, but didn't follow. Instead, she remained stationed between him and the Rangers, as if ensuring his safe passage to his family. As he walked, tears began rolling down Ethan's cheeks. Each step away from Lila felt heavier than the last. He had experienced something extraordinary, a connection that transcended the natural order, a friendship that shouldn't have been possible. Sarah opened her arms as Ethan approached, but kept her movements slow and controlled, aware of the lioness's watchful gaze. When Ethan finally reached his family, his mother enveloped him in a tight embrace, her own tears flowing freely. Lila observed the reunion from her position by the stream, her posture gradually relaxing as she watched Ethan safely return to his group. The Rangers maintained their defensive formation, but their tension eased as they realized the lioness had no intention of pursuing the boy. "She protected me," Ethan explained through his tears, still held tightly in his mother's arms. "She kept me warm all night and showed me where to find food. She's not dangerous." His voice carried a mix of gratitude and pleading, worried about what might happen to his unlikely friend. The Rangers began a careful retreat, guiding the Matthews family back toward the trail. Jake kept his tranquilizer gun ready but hidden, watching as Lila remained stationary, her eyes fixed on Ethan's departing form. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Ethan turned back one last time. Lila still stood by the stream, her powerful form silhouetted against the morning light. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, both boy and lioness seemed to acknowledge the extraordinary nature of their brief time together. The forest around them had fallen silent, as if nature itself was witnessing this unprecedented farewell between species. What had begun as a frightening ordeal had transformed into something remarkable, a story that would challenge preconceptions about the divide between wild and tame, between danger and protection. As the group prepared to leave the clearing, a soft rustling from the undergrowth caught everyone's attention. Lila's ears perked up, and she turned toward the sound. From between the ferns emerged a tiny form, a lion cub, no more than a few months old, its coat still spotted with the markings of youth. The revelation stunned the onlookers into silence. The cub wobbled slightly as it made its way to Lila, who greeted it with a gentle nuzzle. Suddenly, her protective behavior toward Ethan took on new meaning. She was already in a maternal role, caring for her own young. "That's why she helped me," Ethan whispered, understanding dawning in his eyes. "She's a mom too." The cub looked around curiously, staying close to Lila's legs while examining the group of humans with innocent interest. Chief Martinez immediately recognized the significance of this discovery. A lioness with a cub changed everything. It explained both Lila's presence in the area and her surprisingly nurturing behavior toward Ethan. She hadn't just been a random predator. She was a mother who had extended her protective instincts to include a lost child. The presence of the cub also presented a new challenge. The Rangers couldn't simply leave a lioness and her baby in the Colorado wilderness, but traditional wildlife relocation methods might not be appropriate either. This situation would require a completely new approach. As the group watched, the cub playfully batted at its mother's tail, seemingly oblivious to the tension around them. The sight touched something deep in everyone present. This wasn't just about a lost boy anymore. It had become a story about motherhood, protection, and the unexpected bonds that can form between species. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's experience gained national attention. His photographs of Lila and their time together, including the stunning revelation of her cub, sparked intense public interest. Wildlife experts and conservationists flocked to the area, amazed by the presence of an African lioness successfully raising a cub in the Colorado wilderness. Investigation revealed that Lila had likely escaped from an illegal exotic animal trading operation years ago. Rather than perishing in the unfamiliar environment, she had adapted, carving out a territory and eventually raising her cub in secret. Her survival was a testament to both her intelligence and the surprising adaptability of her species. The public response was overwhelming. Conservation groups launched campaigns to protect both Lila and her cub while maintaining their freedom. A wildlife sanctuary was established in the area, preventing development and ensuring their territory remained undisturbed. Rather than capturing and relocating them, experts decided to monitor them from a distance, studying this unique case of successful adaptation. Ethan became an unexpected ambassador for wildlife conservation. His story, supported by his remarkable photographs, challenged people's assumptions about wild animals and sparked important discussions about human-wildlife interactions. He spoke at schools and conservation events, sharing his experience of being protected rather than threatened by a wild predator. The strip of forest where Ethan had spent that fateful night was designated as a protected wildlife corridor. Other animals began using this safe passage, creating a thriving ecosystem that became a model for conservation efforts nationwide. The presence of Lila and her cub had inadvertently created a blueprint for how humans and wildlife could coexist. Years later, people would still speak of the lost boy and the lioness mother who protected him. The story became a symbol of hope, suggesting that sometimes the most profound connections occur when we set aside our fears and recognize the shared experiences that unite all living beings. Lila and her cub continued to thrive in their forest home, their presence a reminder that nature still holds mysteries and possibilities we have yet to fully understand. Through it all, Ethan kept his most precious photograph displayed in his room, an image of Lila standing protectively beside him by the stream, her eyes full of gentle wisdom, both of them proof that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are the ones that remind us of our shared capacity for compassion and connection.